Welcome to all of our guests. Today we come to Oklahoma City at the request of Chairman Lankford. As members of a committee that oversees all of government, the most important part of government is our relationship with the private sector's job creators. So our field hearings around the country, including here in Oklahoma City today, are about finding out how jobs are created and what the impediments to job creation are. Red tape, stumbling blocks of all sorts, sometimes simply government not getting out of the way, are what we usually hear about. Today, obviously the subject will be energy and energy independence. At a time when America imports as much oil as it produces, and yet we find that in oil, in natural gas, in coal, and other minerals, we could be self-sufficient. Our committee is here today to find out why we are not. When asked to come to Oklahoma City by Chairman Lankford, I not only said yes, but I said, when would be the best time to do it? And he said, it's beautiful in Oklahoma City all year. Not believing that, I consulted with a weatherman, and they said, you know, you can come any time to Oklahoma City and you will get weather. So, James, I want to thank you for providing the kind of weather we'd hoped for today. Additionally, Mr. Farenthold has come from Texas. Now, he will make an opening statement. He will insult Oklahoma appropriately by calling it some portion of northern Austin. Be prepared for it. I will close what is an informal opening statement by making it clear that I do have a connection to Oklahoma. Now, my connection is tenuous, but I want you to understand that we can stretch to it, because Blake may stretch to it. Boone Pickens' wife is my constituent. So I know Boone comes to Oklahoma from time to time to give a few bucks to universities, and a few. But not necessarily here. I didn't see the stadium at this particular location. But you do have 3 members of Congress. We each have something in common. We all claim Boone Pickens, which means we all understand that America is the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, and that in fact we do have an abundance of a very clean fuel, one that if we used should please both the left, who want us to reduce our carbon footprint, and the right, myself included, who want to know that America can feed itself the energy that changed the Stone Age. Because as a friend of mine once said, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. It ended because we learned how to harness energy. And with that, I recognize, actually, I'm going to save you for last. Mr. Farenthold for his opening statement, and then, Chairman, if you would introduce the panel at the end of your opening statement, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman ISSA. Chairman Lankford, I'm happy to be up here north of the Red River. As I was so appropriately informed by Representative Lankford earlier this morning, I'm not really from Texas. I'm from Baja, Oklahoma. I always thought it. Talking points, fine. And I always thought Oklahoma was far north Dallas, but I'll accept Baja. I'll accept being from Baja, Oklahoma today. And you know, energy is critical to our country, and the energy production and low energy prices we have right now overcome a lot of problems with American competitiveness. You know, we have a higher labor rate, higher cost of doing business here in America, higher regulatory costs. But our low energy prices make America a real good option for a revitalization of manufacturing jobs. And we can overcome the paying our people well here, but we can't overcome paying our people well here and an intrusive amount of government regulation. So I think we're one of the things I would like to get out of the hearing today is some feedback from the panel about how overregulation from Washington is affecting not only the oil and gas industry, but overall the economic development in Oklahoma and the remainder of the country. I think you'll find that you've got a group of people up here from Congress, Chairman Lankford and Chairman ISSA and myself. You know, Chairman ISSA is from California. Obviously, Mr. Lankford is from Oklahoma. I'm from Texas. That's 3 of the top 5 crude oil producing states in the country. I'm proud to be in the top 5 with you guys. So I'm looking forward to listening to what our panelists have to say, asking our questions, and developing a record so we can take the Oklahoma experience back to Washington, D.C. and learn how it's being done in states like Oklahoma and Texas where it's working. Thank you.
Mr. Lankford, I want to thank you for bringing us here, and the hearing is yours, at least through the introduction of this incredibly good panel.
Thank you. And I do want to say thank you as well to the chairman for bringing the hearing here. It is an unusual thing to bring Washington to Oklahoma. We try to take Oklahoma to Washington. Now we're trying to turn that thing around, get some wisdom into it. So I really appreciate you being here, for the staff that's here, for Blake being here as well, being a part of it. I want to thank the University of Central Oklahoma as well for hosting this event and for allowing us to be able to come into this great facility, this great room. And then also our witnesses, which I'll introduce in just a moment here. I have a formal opening statement on it that I'd like to get a chance to read through to set the tone for what we're trying to accomplish today, and to be able to set some of those questions there. Because since the 1970s and all the energy crisis and all the spikes in fuel costs, our nation has talked about an energy policy that would make our nation energy independent. We're all used to the comments of why aren't we energy independent. We focused on exploration, on supply lines, on diversification of fuels, renewable fuels, natural resources, and the environment, and more. We've asked ourselves, do we consume too much? Do we produce too little? Or is our resources, are they just in short supply? In the middle of this 40-year journey, we've invested in oil, coal, natural gas, hydroelectric, solar, nuclear, geothermal, biofuels, hydrogen, and multiple other experimental fuels. But we're not energy independent yet. Not even North American energy independent yet. What I want to know is why? What's preventing us from attaining energy independence? Our economy runs on inexpensive and reliable energy. Millions of jobs are created by energy. If we can move from talking about it to actually doing it, our energy independence could make the difference in the American economy. Around $300 billion a year is spent on purchasing crude oil from foreign sources, which is a tremendous drain on our economy. We have to deal with the national security the implications of that as well, depending on foreign sources. Our Navy just sent out the Green Fleet for a test run on biofuels that cost $27 a gallon. The goal is to find a way to function our military on fuels that we can grow and produce so we're not at risk of a fuel shortage in time of war. That's a noble cause, but again, it begs the question, why can't we produce our own energy at a reasonable rate and ample supply? I want to know today, is it our lack of supply? The president loves to imply that we're running out of oil and we have to switch to other fuels. He repeats often, 2% of the world's proven reserves, but we use 20% of the world's oil. Are we running out? In the 1970s, President Jimmy Carter's administration forced electricity generation towards coal because he believed that we were running out of natural gas and we need to use an abundant fuel for electricity generation. Now that Oklahomans have demonstrated the incredible abundance of natural gas in America, this administration has turned its attention to attacking natural gas for exploration and usage. I want to know, is it our regulatory environment? The federal regulations and guidance appear to be in front of science at times. BLM and EPA have already made major moves against hydraulic fracking, but in 2010, congressionally mandated study of fracking has not even released its draft findings or its first tier of the study. For the past 2 years, in fact, EPA has studied the nation's 5 worst environmental sites around fracked wells to look for any environmental consequences. And though the study has not been released, it's my understanding that the initial findings were actually very positive. The first tier of the study, without any conclusive findings, will be released late this year, by the way, after the election, and the final data to be released in 2014. The control wells in the frac study have not even begun the field research yet. But the lack of evidence hasn't slowed the frequent guidance and regulations concerning fracking from the federal government. Same is true for air quality around the sites. EPA has manipulated gas release data from flowback from a few well sites and extrapolated that data onto all producers, when in reality, even the initial data study, the 3 companies' flowback, was seriously flawed and has been demonstrated to EPA as flawed. It doesn't seem to slow down the EPA assault on emissions around well sites. In fact, it was estimated that EPA overestimated the release by 1,400%. That's a slight error. What's ironic is the regional haze rule policy that came about because environmental groups sued the EPA, and then the EPA quickly settled with them, what we call sue and settle. We can go on and on about the issues of just connecting science with actual practice of energy. I want to know, is our regulatory environment slowing down our production? Permits for oil and gas and mining have dropped dramatically on federal lands, and the length of time it takes to acquire a federal permit to drill is 10 times longer on federal land than it is on private land. And when a project finally does move forward, brace yourself for this. We have to still deal with Department of Interior and Fish and Wildlife. Let me give you 2 Oklahoma examples you may or may not have heard of. In western Oklahoma, we have a wild chicken called the lesser prairie chicken. This chicken apparently is a chicken, and it will not breed around anything tall or noisy. So Fish and Wildlife has stated it wants control over western Oklahoma and wants to keep at least 64% of all of western Oklahoma uncultivated to benefit the lesser prairie chicken. Fish and Wildlife wants controls over how many cows can graze in a field, how many fields or farms for crops, when we put in roads, energy production, including wind energy, and much more. You may not know about that chicken right now, but once we begin more and more exploration for oil and gas in western Oklahoma, you'll know more about it. In southern Oklahoma, we have a multi-million-dollar pipeline project on hold because a doctoral student in Kansas gave his work about the burying beetle to Fish and Wildlife. Now the Keystone Pipeline and other pipelines are on hold until they can prove they won't affect the beetle. Do you remember that the president standing in front of the big stack of empty oil pipes, talking about how we're going to expedite all the permits for the Keystone Pipeline in the southern leg? Well, guess what? They've all stopped because Fish and Wildlife has shut it down because of a burrowing beetle that's common across southern Oklahoma. I want you to know, I want to know, if we don't have energy independence because the federal government cares more about chickens and beetles than people and national security, I think we need to find out. I want to know if the federal government's intentionally slowing down production by taking over state primacy to permit electricity generation and exploration. And I want to know if we're really running out of supply, so we have to move today to a different fuel for our national survival. Today is the day for Oklahoma common sense. And hearing the testimony of people who have to live with the federal regulations and still provide energy that our nation requires to thrive, I really am looking forward to the testimony and to the insight. Several of these folks I've met before, several of them I have not, but I'm looking forward to your expertise in this. Let me introduce the people that are here. Michael Ming is the Oklahoma Secretary of Energy, incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly passionate about the future of our nation and energy independence on this. Patrice Douglas is our newest commissioner of the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, very well known in this room and in Edmond as a whole because he's former mayor of Edmond. Mr. Mike McDonald is the president of Triad Energy and the president of the Domestic Energy Producers Alliance. Comes with a lot of experience and background on independent production. Patricia Horn, I think it's just Tricia Horn, isn't it? Is the Vice President for Governance, Environmental Health, and Safety at OG&E and has a great deal of knowledge about wind and about coal and about the background of how we use that for electricity generation. Mr. Brian Woodard is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs of the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association. He comes with a tremendous background and experience in the regulatory environment. Mr. Joseph Linder is an Environmental Health and Safety Engineer at Devon Energy Corporation and knows extremely well the issues that we face in regulatory environments and in the environment and in drilling and producing on federal lands. So I'm honored these guests are here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lankford. The Oversight Committee exists to secure 2 fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know the money Washington takes from them was well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We have an obligation to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the federal bureaucracy. That is why we are here today. Pursuant to our committee rules, I would ask that all the witnesses please rise to take the oath. And raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record indicate all answered in the affirmative. Please take a seat. As promised before we began, I will reduce how we do business on the committee to simple stop lighting that we all deal with. In front of you, there's a timer that has a green, a yellow, and a red light. The green means go. The yellow means go fast to get underneath the light before it turns red. And red means get through the intersection and stop if you're not in the intersection. If you have not reached the intersection, find a way to stop anyway. So with that, Mr. Ming, if you would prepare your testimony or present your testimony, recognizing that for all of you, your full testimony will be placed in the record, so you may go off script as you see fit to help make the record more complete. The gentleman is recognized.
Good morning, Chairman ISSA and members of the committee. My name is Michael Ming. I currently serve as the Oklahoma Secretary of Energy under Governor Mary Fallin. I previously served 5 years as the president of the Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America, a non-profit public-private partnership which I helped found that manages the nation's unconventional natural gas and ultra-deep water research programs with oversight from the U.S. Department of Energy. Prior to that, I spent 25 years as an independent oil and natural gas producer, drilling and operating wells as a hands-on operational petroleum engineering. So I have been at this business over 30 years. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today before you to discuss the important topic of unnecessary and burdensome regulations, one that could not be more important at this critical time to our nation's security and economic well-being. My comments today are of a general but pointed nature. I will discuss the roles of both federal and state governments in developing and enforcing regulations that should seek to balance the needs of producing reliable, secure, affordable, and environmentally acceptable energy supplies for America. While others may speak to specific examples of overreaching and onerous regulations, I will direct my comments to the diseased federal regulatory culture. I will focus on 3 areas. 1, what appears to be a concerted agenda to push for federal regulation over state regulation, especially around hydraulic fracturing. 2, the overtly compromised practices of federal agencies, struggling to justify their existence in a world of reduced government budgets. And 3, a concerning increase in the influence and direct involvement of activist environmental groups in federal research and regulation. To appreciate the rapid acceleration of this unprecedented regulatory effort, it is critical to first understand what has transpired in the last 7 years in America. A literal tsunami of new but traditional energy supplies has totally disrupted our nation's energy future, starting first with unconventional natural gas from shale formations, progressing to unconventional oil from shales, and now unlocking formerly marginal supplies of oil. While a few years back, these newfound supplies of natural gas were viewed as just a clean bridge fuel to the future, they are now also unquestionably a part of our energy future for decades to come. 2011 marked the highest annual U.S. natural gas production on record, eclipsing records from the early 1970s, and January 2012 was the highest monthly natural gas production on record. And the United States is now the largest natural gas producer in the world. If the value of U.S. natural gas production was calculated based on its energy content relative to an oil equivalent price, as it is generally elsewhere around the globe, it would imply an economic stimulus of approximately $300 billion per year to the U.S. economy. It is also likely that in the next 4 or 5 years, the U.S. will erase 20 years of oil decline, and depending on the forecaster, it is possible that North America could be energy independent in the next 10 years. Excessive regulation and the climate of uncertainty created thereby places these opportunities and America's chance at energy independence at risk. Hydraulic fracturing has become the point of attack. It is both the key to accessing these new supplies, and it is the epicenter of the disruptive wave that ideologues are attempting to stop. These impressive developments have significantly changed the tactics of those who want to see traditional fuel use eliminated. Rather than attempting to make our energy system better, they would prefer to ideologically replace traditional energy at any cost. Yet this view of the world ignores 3 critical aspects of energy policy: balance, system optimization, and scale. First, all forms of energy have consequences, whether traditional or renewable. It is critical, therefore, to balance the trade-offs between human needs and environmental sustainability. Second, in order to optimize our existing energy resources, we must look at energy as a system instead of in discrete fuel silos. This means looking for synergistic opportunities to leverage our energy resources instead of simply using them the same way we always have. Finally, the issue of scale has to be acknowledged. It seems that some in Washington either don't understand this concept or they don't want to understand it. Traditional fuels provide unmatched energy on demand at scale today and are therefore indispensable to our energy portfolio. It is also important to recognize that there is no better way to protect the environment than to have a strong economy. Environmental protection is clearly correlated to economic health. One only has to look at the developing world to understand this tragedy, whether looking at denuded hillsides in Haiti or Africa, experiencing virtually unbreathable air in Chinese cities, or witnessing unregulated toxic discharges in third world countries. Economic health is the gateway to environmental protection. In this light, it seems we are on a well-orchestrated and micromanaged path that sacrifices economic development in an ideological quest to eliminate all fossil fuels. It is disguised in the name of environmentalism and carried out under the auspices of regulation. I confess I am both a capitalist and an environmentalist. One can be both. I lecture frequently on how traditional fuels in partnership with renewable energy and energy efficiency actually possess almost unlimited potential. Leveraged together and treated as a system, the combination can affordably power our nation's factories, homes, and economic future while reducing emissions, improving system reliability, enhancing fuel diversity, and hedging price volatility. Just as importantly, it offers the first real opportunities in decades to essentially become energy independent. We can't let ideological regulation stymie the important role that capital markets play in this evolution. There are those, however, who are not pleased with this grand disruption and the unprecedented emergence of unconventional resources in time and scale based on private sector technology and innovation. This new supply of affordable energy has imparted a newfound sense of urgency to opponents of traditional energy. I believe these opponents play a key role in this new area of exceptional regulation. One only has to look at the recently announced Sierra Club's Beyond Gas campaign, which I believe actually sacrifices environmental benefits in the name of environmentalism. This committee's recent hearing on sue and settle, or others have called it a wink and a nod, only reinforces the perception of something that cannot pass the sniff test. Recent specific events that have highlighted the close connection of environmental activists to bureaucrats should be of great concern. Furthermore, there appears to be a huge conflict of interest between government research and regulation. In a recent hearing before the House Committee on Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Energy and Power, Congressman Joe Barton revealed that a disturbing number of EPA's supposedly independent Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee were also recipients of federal research funding. Such practices undermine scientific credibility and lead to the most insidious form of science, where the experiments might be designed to produce the desired results. Furthermore, widely referred studies used to justify policy objectives simply because the conclusions fit the desired outcome, even if the conclusions are flawed. Excuse me?
If you could summarize the
Okay.
I'm looking at the number of pages there, and I apologize.
I just got a half a page, but I'll go to summary.
Thank you.
I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today and encourage you to take a pragmatic and balanced approach to energy. While digging into specific overreaching regulations is one approach, it only addresses the symptoms. I urge you to look at the root of the problem, which is the diseased culture itself, and I've described 3 of the viruses: a perceived agenda to preempt state regulatory authority, unchecked growth in the bureaucracy, and the relationship of third-party activists in creating regulations. I also urge you, if you are so inclined, to consider reading Governor Fallon's Oklahoma First Energy Plan. It is a pragmatic and balanced plan, one that other states and the federal government can use as a template to optimize their own resources. Thank you for your invitation and your attention.
Thank you, and thank you for the years in which Mary was a member of Congress. She gave us quite a few of those ideas during that time, too. Ms. Douglas.
Thank you for coming to Oklahoma, and thank you for letting me be a part of this proceeding today. I would be remiss if I didn't welcome you to Oklahoma, but I would be extremely remiss if I didn't welcome you to Edmond as its former mayor. So I am so glad you're here. Edmond is glad you're here, and we're proud to have this proceeding taking place here. I'm going to go off script. I'm going to talk a little bit about my perspective as a state regulator. And I have to disclose to you that in my former life I was a banker. So I have a healthy skepticism of federal regulation. I have seen what federal regulation can do to an economy and to an industry. And so when I was asked to be on Oklahoma's chief regulating board for so many industries, I brought this skepticism with me. I want to talk about three different things today. I want to talk first about the difference in a state regulator and a federal regulator. I want to talk also about how Oklahoma has managed some of the national topics like disclosure of chemicals in frac fluids. I also want to talk to you a little bit about how I see this overlap into the utility industry and what I see coming for Oklahoma based on some of the regulations that are being forced down on Oklahomans. First, I'm disheartened by the fact that we even have to talk about whether a state regulatory body should be in charge of the oil and gas industry, in charge of the utility industry, in charge of so many of the industries that we regulate. The state regulators have vast amounts of experience. Just this year, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission held over 30,000 hearings. We issued over 10,000 orders, and more than 6,500 of those orders involved the oil and gas industry. So in 1 year, we had 6,500 cases worth of experience in regulating the oil and gas industry. And then you multiply that times the fact that we have a regulator on our commission who's been there for 24 years, and you can see the vast experience that we bring. The other thing that Oklahoma regulators know and understand is that we've been fracking wells since 1948. And I think you can drink our water and you can breathe our air. We've been regulating this industry since the early 1900s. And we have right now over 190,000 active wells in Oklahoma. So the Corporation Commission has vast experience in regulating the oil and gas industry. We have a lot of expertise, and I believe also we're able to recognize that every individual is different, every state is different, as is every geological formation. So what fits in Pennsylvania doesn't fit in Oklahoma. One size does not fit all when it comes to regulation of this kind of an industry. And as a state regulator, I get to take into consideration what my industry in Oklahoma needs. Secondly, I want to talk to you a little bit about how we did a different approach with regard to the disclosure of hydraulic fracking chemicals. There was a big push, I'm sure you've seen it in the news, about how bad hydraulic fracturing is and how concerned people were about the chemicals that were in hydraulic fracturing, the process. So we in Oklahoma decided to be a leader in this area. Our industry came together, and almost 100% the industry agreed that we should disclose. Even if the industry didn't believe it was going to make people safer, they felt like it was going to give the perception of making people feel safer. So they were willing to come to the table and talk to us. As we worked on the rule for how we were going to disclose these chemicals, we found out that small companies and large companies had different needs, but we all wanted to reach the same goal, was making sure that Oklahoma was protected. So instead of having a one-size-fits-all kind of rule, what we did was we enacted a rule that allowed this disclosure through two different methods. And recognizing that a small business guy can't afford the additional time and research and training that it takes to maybe input all this data into a database with regard to the chemicals used, we as a commission took that responsibility on ourselves. So we gave two different avenues by which you can report these chemicals, and we allow companies to choose. So we show in that rule that one size does not fit all, that Oklahoma needed a rule that would work for Oklahoma. Lastly, I want to say something really quickly about the utility industry. I see the EPA pushing a rule that, as a regulator, is going to force me to enact $2.1 billion of increases on utility customers in Oklahoma. Are they going to get safer electricity? No. Are they going to get more electricity? No. Is it going to be more reliable? No. What it does is it forces utilities to make decisions about assets before the time is ready to make decisions about assets. So I believe if Oklahoma was given the choice of formulating a rule, we would formulate a rule that encouraged what our natural resources are, that encouraged the use of those natural resources, and that helped Oklahoma consumers. Thank you for letting me be here today.
Thank you so much. Mr. McDonald.
Chairman ISSA, Congressman Lankford, Congressman Farenthold, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I thank the committee for its oversight of executive branch agencies and for investigating regulations that hamper the production of domestic crude oil and natural gas. These fossil fuels are critical to Oklahoma and the nation. I am the co-owner of Triad Energy, Inc., a 31-year-old independent producer of crude oil and natural gas. I have 11 employees. I am the current president of the Domestic Energy Producers Alliance and immediate past chairman of the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association. This year, our company will drill 10 wells. I have submitted my written testimony for the record and will take only a few moments to address key points. First, we must understand that fossil fuel opponents follow a proven strategy to curb production of oil and natural gas, a strategy to wrap small businesses like mine in enough red tape to affect our mission to provide affordable U.S. energy. These professional fossil fuel opponents cannot rely on facts or science to justify their efforts, so they resort to fear-mongering. This strategy has been on grand display lately, especially on hydraulic fracturing. The EPA's wrongful actions in Texas, Wyoming, and Pennsylvania, and the resignation of an EPA regional administrator when his, I quote, "crucify them" enforcement plan was exposed, show the limits of federal credibility when it comes to regulating oil and gas operations. Regulators now admit that hydraulic fracturing is a safe and proven technology governed by effective state controls, but the Bureau of Land Management will press forward with costly, time-consuming, and additional rules to regulate hydraulic fracturing on federal and tribal lands. Flaws in a 40-year-old Endangered Species Act allow fossil fuel opponents to slow energy development with species listings that make no sense and for which there is no recovery plan. The EPA's new greenhouse gas reporting regimen will cost our industry hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Every dollar that I must spend on compliance and paperwork is a dollar I cannot spend exploring for oil and gas. In effect, these regulations are hidden taxes on my company. Compliance costs cannot be recovered because I do not have the ability to increase the price of my product. We are price takers, not price makers. But the agencies merely reflect the president's anti-fossil fuel bias. Each of President Obama's 4 budgets has specifically targeted small producers like me. The president has proposed raising my taxes by repealing a tax provision which has been the law of the land since 1913 that allows me to expense normal business costs such as labor, fuel, and supplies, and by preventing me and millions of royalty owners from coast to coast from depleting well assets as they decline, which has been on the books since 1926. The impact of such tax proposals would be devastating for American energy independence. Without my ability to expense normal business costs, I would be forced to cut my drilling budget by at least 30%. That's less steel manufactured in Pennsylvania, fewer jobs to help our nation's economic recovery, less money in the pockets of my royalty owners, and less revenue to Oklahoma and the U.S. Treasury. And this is not a small impact. There are 18,000 independent producers like me operating in 32 states who would also have to reduce their budgets. We are not big oil, but together, we independent producers drill 95% of all wells drilled in the U.S. and produce roughly 82% of U.S. natural gas production and more than 54% of U.S. oil production. And we pay a lot of taxes, royalties, and rents to federal, state, and local governments. In 2010, we generated $131 billion for federal and state coffers. In Oklahoma, our industry is responsible for 1 out of every $3 in gross state product, 1 out of every $5 in personal income, and represents 1 out of every 6 jobs in our state. Since 2009, our industry has added nearly 12,000 jobs, with an average compensation of more than $113,000 per job. We're helping the U.S. economy recover, but we cannot create more jobs nor make America energy independent if our hands are tied by federal red tape. Thank you very much for allowing me to appear today. I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Horn.
Good morning, Chairman Eisman. Good morning, Representative Lankford and Farenthal. So nice of you to be here in Oklahoma, and we so appreciate all the work that you do for us in Washington. I'm here to speak on behalf of Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company, an electric utility headquartered in Oklahoma City. OG&E is the largest utility operating in Oklahoma, with approximately 790,000 customers in 268 communities in Oklahoma and western Arkansas. If I could just brag for just a moment, in 2011, OG&E was named Best in Class for Customer Service by J.D. Powers and Associates. Later in 2011, OG&E and its members were named the 2011 Utility of the Year in North America by Electric Light and Power magazine. We're proud of those accomplishments. My company and I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today and speak about the unnecessary and burdensome federal regulations that are affecting our industry. Our electric industry is the most capital-intensive industry in the U.S. economy, a reality which necessitates that we have a multi-decade planning horizon. But the recent suite of EPA rules affecting issues such as regional haze visibility, maximum achievable control technology, best technology available for cooling water intake structures, and disposal and handling of coal combustion residuals make cost-effective capital investment planning by utilities such as ours very difficult, extremely costly. The required compliance for the gamut of EPA's new rules effectively compels OG&E to make a premature and illogical choice about expensive capital investments that determine long-term how we will generate electricity. We are not faced with a situation where one alternative is costly and another is not. Rather, all the compelled choices required by EPA's rules are expensive and are made more difficult due to their technical complexity and uncertainty. To put the regional haze cost quandary that you've heard some about this morning into perspective, the estimated capital cost of installing scrubbers on four of OG&E's 5 coal units, as ordered by the EPA in its federal implementation plan, is over $1 billion. It is over $1 billion for our company alone. And that doesn't even include the O&M on the, that would be annual between 70 and 150 million. On the other hand, the other choice faced by OG&E is if we replace its coal units with natural gas generation, we would face the capital costs of replacing, retiring, and converting the coal unit's baseload capacity and the related natural gas fuel costs. We estimate that that switch to natural gas would even be more expensive than installing scrubbers and also leave our generation fleet with no fuel diversity, something we've talked about this morning that we feel is very important. Both of these options involve unprecedented rate implications for our customers and would commence what we believe an adverse ripple effect on our Oklahoma economy and the ability of our state to create jobs. Aside from the cost implications, we are troubled by the justifications and the analysis that EPA provides for implementing these regulations, whether old regulations or new. EPA overrode a state implementation plan for regional haze that was the product of intensive good faith negotiations with the entire range of Oklahoma interests. That SIP achieved the visibility objectives at a fraction of the cost of the federal implementation plan. Similarly, EPA has also determined that Oklahoma should be included in the cross-state air pollution rule, a rule that came out in late 2011 and included Oklahoma almost as an afterthought. Based on what? Based on our air emissions affecting a county in Michigan that was in attainment status. We are encouraged that the federal courts have issued stays in both the regional Hayes case and the cross-state matters, pending the considerations of those merits of our appeals. Until those legal processes reach an end, OG&E must face the possibility of eventually complying with these very expensive rules which threaten our ability to invest, create jobs, and provide Oklahomans cost-effective power for both their homes and their businesses. But those are not our only regulatory threats. EPA is considering a proposed Clean Water Act rule that, in the name of protecting fish, bait fish, and minnows from impingement and entrainment, would require us to incur millions of dollars in additional capital and operating costs to retrofit the water intake structures at our cooling water lakes at 3 of our facilities. We have pointed out to EPA that the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation ranks these lakes currently among the top fishing venues, and they have found no material adverse impact on the fishery resources of those lakes. Why would anyone order us to spend tens of millions of dollars to reconfigure when there is no demonstrated harm to the fish in those lakes? I could go on about the coal combustion residuals as well. It offers the same story and concern. Finally, I'd like to note that aside from EPA's regulatory excesses, the energy sector is very concerned with the possible listing of the lesser prairie chicken, as you've heard today. It would affect our wind farm developments, our electric transmission projects, our natural gas gathering and transportation pipelines. Those could be blocked or seriously delayed, which means that energy resources, jobs, and beneficial economic activity associated with those projects would be in jeopardy. My written testimony describes the alternative ways of protecting the lesser prairie chicken that we are looking at, and we are working with numerous other Oklahoma agencies and companies to actively engage our state wildlife experts to do just that. In all these matters, the EPA and the federal agencies would be well served by an understanding of the implications and the affected interest prior to taking action, and to take a rational and harmonized course of action designed to minimize the impact to the energy development, which is a critical economic engine for our state and for the nation. Thank you for allowing me to be here to present my views.
Thank you. Mr. Woodard.
Chairman ISSA, Chairman Lankford, Congressman Barenthal. My name is Brian Woodard, and I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs with the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in my hometown today concerning unnecessary and burdensome regulations which unduly threaten America's energy future. The OIPA was founded in 1955 and represents approximately 2,300 small to large independent operators who are primarily involved with the exploration and production of crude oil and natural gas in the state. In recent years, assisted by technological advances in horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, Oklahoma oil and gas operators have actively developed sources of natural gas like the Woodford Shale, as well as sources of natural gas liquids and crude oil from the Cleveland, Tonkawa, Granite Wash, and Mississippi Lime plays. Since 2009, Oklahoma's oil and natural gas industry has added nearly 12,000 jobs. As I hope my testimony reveals, this industry, along with the associated jobs and energy from the fossil fuel it produces, is critical not just to Oklahoma, but to the nation. However, as I sit before you today and tout America's current oil and gas renaissance, and as the blueprint has been laid for a true era of U.S. energy independence, the current administration has countered with an equivalent flood of regulatory policies which threaten to undermine this bright energy future. To elaborate on this, I will briefly discuss 2 recent federal air regulations, in addition to challenges we, as Oklahomans, face due to recent and unprecedented actions under the Endangered Species Act. In 2008, Congress directed EPA to conduct an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions throughout all sectors of the economy. Subpart W is a section of the resultant EPA rule dealing with the onshore oil and natural gas industry. Although Congress directed EPA to conduct an inventory, EPA's rule requires annual reporting on behalf of operators. According to analyses of past GHG inventories, oil and natural gas production activities were believed to collectively account for 2% of national GHG emissions, with the largest portion of that 2% being vented natural gas itself, or methane. To place this level of methane emissions into context, EPA's own inventories note that enteric fermentation, or cattle flatulence, contribute substantially higher quantities of methane. However, rather than using simple estimation techniques, EPA created an extremely complex and burdensome regulation that consumed 44 pages in the Federal Register and has led to excessive financial impacts on the order of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for some of our larger independent producers. In similar fashion to this administration's recent proposal to regulate the practice of hydraulic fracturing prior to the completion of the hydraulic fracturing study, EPA has continued their regulate then validate trend by crafting an additional air rule which regulates the very emissions for which Subpart W was designed to inventory. While the EPA has commented on the record that this new source performance standard Subpart Quad O rule will be cost-effective for the industry, this statement is not only misleading but is insulting. Under this rule, EPA has used methane as a surrogate for volatile organic compounds to justify the economic basis of the rule. In order to be cost-effective, the rule should only apply to production streams which contain a meaningful VOC concentration. For sources with significantly low to zero VOC content, such as dry gas shells like the Haynesville and Barnett and others, the cost per ton of emission reductions drastically exceeds historically acceptable levels. Unfortunately, excessive regulation under the Clean Air Act is only one of many regulatory hurdles for which Oklahoma oil and gas producers face. Switching to the topic of the Endangered Species Act, in September 2011, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reached an unprecedented settlement agreement with two conservation groups. As a result of the agreement, the Fish and Wildlife Service is required to establish annual work plans that gradually reduce a backlog of greater than 600 candidate species over a 6-year period. Of particular concern to Oklahoma, and as previously noted, oil and gas operators is a listing and a critical habitat designation for the lesser prairie chicken. As previously mentioned, Oklahoma has been blessed with rich energy resources, including 4 of this nation's leading tight oil and gas plays. However, the listing of the lesser prairie chicken threatens to jeopardize development and production of this economic boon, as the chicken's habitat range directly overlies the core acreage of these plays. It is our hope that the Fish and Wildlife Service, working with state and local stakeholders, will recognize and support the extensive voluntary conservation efforts that are currently underway, rather than impeding economic development with a chilling threatened or endangered listing under the antiquated Endangered Species Act. And last but not least, I would like to mention a recent ESA development affecting oil and gas producers, among others, throughout the eastern portion of our state. The American burying beetle was listed as endangered in 1989. At the time, the beetle's known habitat consisted of 2 colonies encompassing 2 counties across the U.S., one of which was Oklahoma's own Latimer County. The listing was made without the designation of any critical habitat, and the recovery plan has not been updated in over 2 decades. However, the beetle has since been recognized to exist by the thousands across many of the Southern Plains states. With the unveiling of a shocking new guidance document in April, overnight, and again, I'll say overnight guidance document, the service had revised the beetle's habitat range based on new modeling standards and eliminated industry's only protocol allowing for continued and sustained development within the habitat range. Guidance supporting interim relief measures and protocols for continued development without a guidance, construction of oil and gas pad sites, pipelines, and roads will continue to be stalled throughout the beetle's habitat range. In conclusion, we must reduce the insurmountable federal regulatory hurdles which plague domestic operators and impede our ability to achieve energy independence and freedom from foreign fuels. This concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard.
Good morning, and thank you for providing the opportunity to testify on such an important issue. My name is Joe Leonard, and I'm the Environmental, Health, and Safety Engineer for Devon Energy with a particular technical expertise in air quality. EPA's unreasonable and inappropriate misuse of industry data and bad science leads to unnecessary and burdensome air quality regulations on the oil and gas industry. I would like to focus on 2 examples of this today. First, I would like to address EPA's development of an emission factor for well completions by improperly using natural gas star data. In short, the EPA assumes the gas recovered would have otherwise been flared or vented. However, industry data shows that reduced emission completions account for significantly more gas produced and sold than would be flared or vented during older and less common completion processes. The figure in my written testimony depicts the comparison between what EPA perceives and what industry data actually shows. Second, EPA Region 6 recently designated Wise County in the state of Texas a significant production and transmission area to be in non-attainment for ozone. Region 6's argument can best be described as arbitrary and capricious. Their stance rests only on 2 data points in their attempt to link the Barnett Shale gas production development. Their science behind the designation is lackluster and relies on methods rejected by other EPA regions. In regards to flawed completion emissions, EPA continues to state that reduced emission completion estimates are reasonable estimates for gas that would have otherwise been flared or vented, despite a wealth of data showing that those estimates are dramatically overstated. This overstatement is consistent with the latest industry study from API-ANGA of more than 90,000 wells that demonstrated estimates were at least 100% too high across upstream processes. This work follows similar industry work that shows even greater errors. This is outrageous because EPA, Using incorrect assumptions, applying inappropriate data, and then analyzing it improperly has not only changed its emission estimates for completion operations on a forward-looking basis, but revised all oil and gas completion estimates back to 1990, a period before the combined use of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking. Since revising its estimates, EPA submitted those estimates as part of the U.S. input to the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, giving it a worldwide audience. The effect of the revision has allowed for the mischaracterization of natural gas. Non-governmental organizations and university studies have claimed that, on a life cycle basis, gas-fired electricity generation is no cleaner than coal-fired, and that natural gas-powered vehicles are no cleaner than those running on gasoline. The ripple effects like these will continue until EPA acknowledges and corrects this inaccurate data. Severe damage has been inflicted on the many benefits of using natural gas as a clean fuel that will last for years to come. EPA must exercise more scrutiny in their methods for calculating such factors if the oil and gas industry is to be represented fairly. This issue proves that casual efforts on the part of the EPA can have such a strong and negative impact to our industry. As I mentioned earlier, EPA has recently designated Wise County, Texas as an ozone non-attainment contributor. An area is considered non-attainment when it exceeds a national air standard, in this case ozone. The area must then take steps to attain the standard or come into attainment. That action in Region 6 was initiated under a since-resigned regional administrator who once likened enforcement action approaches to the oil and gas industry to what might be described as examples by crucifixion. There are several other concerns when analyzing their justification for non-attainment. Concern 1, the model used by Region 6 is inadequate for modeling ozone formation and transport. Other regions specifically refuse to use this method because of its unreliability. Concern 2, the model only traced 2 events over 4 years passing through Wise County, one of which originated in the notoriously non-attainment Tarrant County, which is coincidentally the same county of the only monitor EPA provided results for. Data shows that winds blow from Wise County into Tarrant County less than 3% of the time. Other EPA regions denied non-attainment considerations based solely on wind occurrences of less than 20% of the time. Concern 3, we do not know the results from other monitors downstream of the prevailing wind from Wise County. If the EPA Region 6 wanted to justify Wise County as a contributor of ozone, why did they not provide results for more representative monitors? As the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality described, the presented data seems to be cherry-picked. The second figure in the written testimony shows a composite of all modeling results done by EPA Region 6, with the 2 Wise County events highlighted in red. If Wise County is in fact non-attainment, then Devon will diligently comply with the regulations, but we do not believe the EPA's argument or the data supporting their decision. In conclusion, it is difficult to adequately capture all of the unnecessary and burdensome air regulations imposed on our industry. I hope that the examples of completion emission estimates and Wise County non-attainment provide at least some insight into this issue. This concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank all of you for your testimony. I've got more questions than we possibly have time to have answered, so I would ask each of you the questions we don't get to during this session. Would you agree to make your best effort to answer them in writing? Okay, then without objection, your answers will, in writing will also be included as though it was oral testimony today. Mr. Leonard, Winston Churchill once said an appeaser is somebody who feeds crocodiles hoping they will eat him last. Has Congress been effectively, and many of us, including Mr. Woodard, appeasers by instead of fighting the, if you will, the cooked books, the flawed science and so on, simply tried to reach compromise, do a piece of it? Is one of our challenges the fact that we haven't confronted agencies that no matter how clean the air and water is, and no matter how much it would cost to incrementally clean it just a little more, we essentially try to compromise rather than saying, at what point do we weigh the cost benefits in a different way when the costs are logarithmically higher? I think Ms. Horn certainly brought that up with a $1 billion example. Do you think, in fact, it's time for Congress to stop, as Senator Inhofe might say, appeasing?
We've actually met with some members of the government in regards to completion emission issues. We quite frankly feel that we've been stonewalled. We've presented both written comments and met with them personally and have not received the feedback that we would deem as adequate. However, organizations like this seem to be open to communicate, and we sincerely appreciate that.
Thank you. Ms. Horn, when energy production facilities are put online on behalf of, if you will, the downstream constituency, does EPA, OSHA, everybody else weigh in to every little nuance of detail of how much you're going to put out in order to produce that electricity? Right. So in order to get a license, your scrubbers, your stacks, your processes, all are evaluated and approved when you get your permit, both federal and state. Isn't that true?
Yeah, yes, that's true.
So in a sense, when government comes in during a licensed period, let's say a 30-year period, which is, I think, typical for plants and then relicensing, when they come in the middle of a period, aren't they breaking an implied contract, one in which you know you were online safe, there was an actuarial calculation over the life of that production using coal, what would come out in the way of emissions? Isn't government, in fact, breaking a promise that during that license period you would be able to do certain things?
Yes, I agree. They are. It's an implied contract that, based upon how we looked at it at the time, that we're going to conduct it that way.
And with an anticipation of relicensing, and your facilities go through relicensing, you do normally anticipate that there will be updates, modernization, and a cost, right?
Yes.
So as members of Congress trying to figure out where the fair balance is, shouldn't we give you that quiet period of enjoyment unless there is irreparable harm not anticipated in the permit, so that the taxpayers, in this case the ratepayers, could know that over that period of time they could expect, and this is assuming you get the same quality of coal, the same everything else. Isn't that essentially the broken promise that you deal with in your industry, and Boiler Mac and these other new regulations coming in and wanting to grab you for billions of dollars midstream?
Absolutely. The certainty is something we must have to run our utility business.
Mr. McDonald, you were very convincing in something that I'm glad you put in the record, and that is that the tax treatment that you enjoy is in fact tax treatment that every manufacturer, every production, everybody enjoys, and the ability to expense labor. But more importantly, the dates you put in, and I want to thank you for that. Often in Washington, we lose track of the fact that these aren't some sort of special deal that was stuck in under some evil administration like Ronald Reagan's. In fact, these are ones that FDR didn't see a problem with, and neither did anybody else until suddenly they just wanted to find a little more revenue for the federal coffers, and you were as good a villain as anyone.
Yes, sir. If you'll notice in the media and even our opponents in Congress call these things subsidies. They're not subsidies. No, the government does not send us a check, I can assure you. If they do, I've missed out on it and I'd like to sign up. But they're just, like you said, any manufacturer gets these ordinary and necessary business deductions, and we are, as everybody has testified today, we're making great strides in American and North American energy independence, and that's because of our increased rate in drilling. They do away with these tax provisions. Our rig count's going to drop 30%. There's no way around it.
It is sort of amazing that a country that prints money wants yours faster than you actually make it.
That's a good point.
Ms. Douglas, you regulate, among other things, what happens to the water, what's in the water that goes in for fracking, and what happens to it after it comes out. Isn't that correct?
For the most part.
So under your state control, you've in fact, you and other state agencies are concerned to make sure that if, let's just say, a chemical is in the water when it goes, and in the mixture, if you will, for fracking, when it comes out, you make sure that it doesn't end up in the water supply in the neighborhoods and the surrounding area. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We live here. We drink the water.
And what's the typical well depth in Oklahoma?
It depends. It's gotten a lot deeper with the new technology. You can have wells going 2 or 3 miles down and 1 mile out. So sometimes they go 2 miles out.
But are there any aquifers below a few thousand feet in Oklahoma?
We at the commission make sure that the water supply is protected. And most of the aquifers are much more shallow than where the wells are drilled. So the drilling goes much further down and further out, and
Right.
we make sure that the casing, that everything that is put into the well is protected, protects our water supply. If we find out that something has happened, if we find a well that was drilled in 1907 or 1910 where there's a problem, we have a procedure at the state level to do an immediate plugging so we can protect our water supply.
And I do realize that Oklahoma is often known as a pincushion of the past. You've been drilling here a little longer than other
We have.
places. I will note that having had our first in this series of hearings in Bakersfield, we've got some old wells in California, including one that is under Beverly Hills High.
Oh, wow.
It is, and it's still producing.
Oh, wow.
I often remind Congressman Waxman that he has oil production in his district he hasn't yet been able to shut down. Mr. Ming, I've run out of time, but I briefly wanted to sort of recognize a question and by asking. Now, you control energy, so you deal with your portfolio of oil, natural gas, and, of course, coal. Isn't that right? And when we look at hydraulic fracking, you're not extracting huge amounts of soil or other activities. So just briefly, for the record, when we look at the history of taking copper, gold, silver, or for that matter, coal out of the ground, contrast what the effect of fracking is on the actual disturbance thousands of feet down versus almost any other kind of mineral extraction, just so we could have that in the record.
Well, to start with, just for the water implications, the water requirements from start to finish, full life cycle for natural gas are virtually the lowest of any form of traditional energy. So in that regard, the impact is minimal. As you say, there's no large extractive component to it. The other side of that, the benefits from the natural gas are extraordinary in terms of what they do for the environment, in terms of reduced criteria pollutants, reduced carbon emissions, energy efficiency opportunities from natural gas. The all-in potential of natural gas, this is what makes this so illogical to me as an engineer. We are essentially trying to kill the form of energy that holds the most promise for our nation.
Thank you. Mr. Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't hear from anyone that our problem is supply. I asked initially, is the problem regulatory, or is it supply issues, or is it our efficiency, or is it a combination of all this? I didn't hear from anyone that we're running out of resources. Is there a perception here that we're short of supply, that we don't have the resources to meet the needs of our nation? No. Would you have said that 25 years ago? 25 years ago, looking back in time, didn't have the same technology that we have now, would you have said 25 years ago, we don't have the supply, we can't meet it?
No.
Okay, then I'm hearing then pretty loud and clear, this is not supply issues, this is something else. Is this state policy that's the problem? And you can go ahead and speak freely, Patrice is right there, so.
No.
Okay, then is this federal policy that's taking this on? Because I heard a lot of federal regulations coming out one after another.
Yes.
Okay. Let me just bounce through a couple of these then. Ms. Douglas, let me ask about this. The regional haze, as you mentioned, over a $2 billion increase on ratepayers, it's coming down now. $1 billion of that just being this regional haze rule. Why can't the state take primacy in that one and the state make the decision?
The EPA won't let us.
Did that 5 years ago? Was the state making the decision dealing with regional haze?
5 years ago, I'm not sure that people were talking about it in the way they're talking about it now. It's being construed in a way now it looks to me, it's being construed in a way to meet an objective that's coming from the top office in the nation. I think that if we were permitted to make the regulation in Oklahoma, we could make the regulation in Oklahoma. We could make it with all of the stakeholders at the table. We would remember Oklahomans who live here. We would remember Oklahomans who are going to be paying these utility bills. We would be looking at the natural resources we have as well as the economic resources. The Commission is in a unique position, and I want to point this out to you. The Oklahoma Corporation Commission has constitutional authority to regulate these industries, but we also have a statutory mandate to balance and protect both natural resources and economic resources. So unlike many of these federal agencies that are only looking at one thing, we have to look at the whole picture. So we have to bring everyone to the table, and we have to talk about how we can best balance natural resources and economic resources. So a state level regulation better fits the topics we're discussing.
Ms. Warren, when we talk about regional haze, that sounds like something you'd never want to breathe and never want to take in. Is this a health issue, regional haze?
Regional haze is a visibility standard.
It's visibility, so this only affects the visibility. There's nothing in the regional haze standards that deals with quality of air that you actually breathe.
No, it's only about visibility.
Can you turn on your microphone, please? Yeah, your microphone button right there in front of you. Yeah, go ahead.
I apologize.
Sorry.
And it's only in federal parks. It's protecting the visibility in the federal parks. That's the whole purpose of the statute.
Okay, so is there a federal park in particular that's being identified in Oklahoma?
We have 2 areas in Oklahoma that we look at, the Lawton Wilderness area as well as one in Arkansas as protected areas. But we don't have the same type of parks that some of the other states have.
Okay, so in Oklahoma, our regional haze standards are not about health. They aren't anywhere in the nation. And it's about trying to provide better visibility in one state park in Oklahoma. And it will be $1 billion. Do you know the difference in that visibility rating that they're talking about? Is it something that I could see with the naked eye, that I could tell if I looked at the park and what they're recommending and what we actually have now? Could I tell by looking at it the difference?
We don't believe you really can tell visibly. We, especially in what we, in talking with the commissioner about what the state could do, the state implementation plan was exactly how the state could take control of this through the regional haze. And if EPA would have allowed us and looked at our state implementation plan, we could have done that as a state. And in doing it, the plan we came up with would do the same visibility improvement that the FIP would do with a much lower cost.
The rules that are coming down dealing with hydraulic fracking, specifically, whether it be air quality coming out of that or whether that be the water effect on it, are those science-based at this point? Is there a scientific study completed by EPA or by any agency that says we have to make these decisions because we've done this study, completed it, and so this is the product?
I'll answer that, Congressman. No, the answer is no. In fact, they've come out and stated that there was issues with hydraulic fracturing now on multiple occasions without the necessary data quality, without the proper testing standards, if you will, and they've recently backtracked on 3 of those prominent cases.
Yeah, Mr. McDonald mentioned 3 cases where EPA made an accusation and later came back and said, oops, that really wasn't what it was. So right now that you know, there is no study from the federal government showing any issues with hydraulic fracking or air water quality. So these decisions are based on something besides science.
That's correct.
Okay. Just as a point of reference, the last time we had administration from EPA in front of our committee, we asked point blank, do you know of a single source of water in the country that is contaminated because of hydraulic fracking? And their response to us was no. We don't know of not one source of water that's been contaminated by hydraulic fracking. So it was an interesting interaction on that. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, but do you remember how many wells have been drilled in Oklahoma have been fracked? We had that figure at one time. Isn't it in the tens of thousands?
It's well in excess of tens of thousands, yeah. We have 190,000 wells in Oklahoma right now. So we've been fracking since 1948, so it's a few.
It's a few. It's sort of amazing that you'd almost think in anything else we do, you would have at least a few accidents. So it's sort of one of those things that's so good they've got to stop us from doing it. Mr. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess I'll start with Mr. Ming. You know, Texas and Oklahoma have a lot in common as oil and gas states and such. And I was at an event with our Attorney General a couple of months ago, and somebody asked him, well, what's your job? And he goes, well, I get up in the morning, I go to the office, I sue the federal government, I go home and come back the next day and sue the federal government again, trying to get oppressive federal regulations dealt with or infringements on the various rights that the Attorney General and myself believe are reserved for the states. What is Oklahoma doing with respect to defending itself from these regulations?
Well, right now, like if we just look at the hydraulic fracturing, we are closely monitoring what we feel is a clear move by the EPA for regulation to assert primacy over the activities that Commissioner Douglas described. And I'll quote from an inside EPA wire service. This is an individual, Fred Houchman, director of EPA's Office of Science Policy. They are currently, quote, we're doing a pretty comprehensive look at all the statutes where there are some holes to allow additional regulation. And while officials from EPA say they have no intention to regulate the states, they don't have the capability to regulate the states, we're clearly seeing actions don't meet words. And so I'm working.
Is that being? Do you have a thought as to how that's being driven? I know we had the 3 points. Is it activism, activists involved in the EPA bureaucrats trying to protect their job? What was the third? There was a third one.
So you have the growth of the federal bureaucracy. You have activists, and then you have this agenda for federal preemption of state primacy.
All right, let me go to Mr. McDonald for a second. As an oil and gas man, do you drill on federal lands?
I do not.
Is there a reason you don't?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to share that with us?
Well, the BLM is, I think, maybe Congressman Lankford, one of y'all in y'all's introductory remarks, talked about how long it takes to get a permit and all of the things that you have to do that. And I've got a few Indian leases where I have to deal with them. And I have intentionally, in the last 15 years, not bid on another Indian lease because I have to interact with the federal government. They tell me, now I want you to believe it, this is the God's honest truth. They tell me what I should pay every month. In other words, I'm trying to get the best price I can for natural gas, and they've got a formula. And they come in and tell me, well, you didn't get enough. So you have to pay us 20, 30,
regardless
40.
Of what?
Yeah.
Regardless of the fact gas is now down to what, 270?
Yeah, exactly. So it's unbelievable that I wouldn't try to get as much money as I could for my product, but yet they impose that on us. So when those wells are gone, I won't be involved with federal or Indian land anymore.
I appreciate that. I want to go to Ms. Horn for a second. You're talking about the cost of regulation on your company. When the cost of regulation, the cost of doing business goes up, that doesn't come out of your profit. That comes out of what you charge to the people buying electricity. Is that not correct?
That is how we work as a utility, is that
So
we're able to pass that.
So would it be a fair statement to say that these increased regulatory costs for all practical purposes are a tax on the low-income and middle-class Americans?
It operates to be a tax, yes.
I mean, I have a lot more questions, but I realize I'm already out of time, so
well, we're going to do a quick second round.
Okay.
Mr. Leonard, if you were to present to the federal government using known bad results, known flawed science, anecdotal information that you extrapolated to get a result you wanted to get, and then you submitted it into a government submission for a permit, what would happen to you?
I would receive a weak response to my comments, a thank you for your efforts, a pat on the back, and a thank you very much.
That's if you didn't get prosecuted for lying to the government, right?
That's correct.
So fraud on the government would be one of the things that could happen if you knowingly delivered false information, extrapolations that weren't true, and used that to achieve an agenda to get a permit when, in fact, you shouldn't get one, right?
Yes, sir. And not only would the government reprimand me, but so would the press.
So one of my questions to you is, since we're from the government and we're here to help you,
Yeah, well, my apologies.
is what should we do, and how should we change how Washington treats bureaucrats who knowingly produce and extrapolate and create false documents when we discover that, in fact, they did it with a reason, with malice and forethought in order to get a rule or some agenda that, in fact, was inconsistent with the true science that they knew or could have known?
Well, I understand it's challenging for the EPA to exercise proper scrutiny on all the calculations and regulations they must make, but they must be open to communication when such concerns are brought to them, and that's what I think.
Is there a real likelihood that that you would simply stop worrying about clean air and clean water if the government went back to its historic level of allowing you to regulate? Okay.
No. We live here, and I have a constitutional duty. I take office and I take an oath, and I have a constitutional duty to protect Oklahoma, to protect our natural resources, to protect our economic resources. So much like you're talking about being prosecuted for information down there, I could get in big trouble, and I frankly don't want to be in big trouble, and I respect Oklahoma and Oklahomans.
Well, I'm going to just ask one closing question, and I'll probably just get nods because it's more of a comment than a question. If we were able to not send $300 billion outside the U.S., if we were in fact driving down the cost of all our energy, similar to the way natural gas has gotten, wouldn't we in fact have tens or hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars more to put into environmental research, into cleaning up the air, into finding science that would advance all kinds of benefits to mankind, and in fact, for that matter, helping educate our people? So just one closing question to all of you who deal in energy. Shouldn't the greatest obligation of government be to, in fact, allow and promote energy driving the advancement so that the spin-off advancement of a profitable and prosperous country, in fact, is the ability to do all these other things that our taxpayers, our American citizens, want us to do? So lastly, as my red light comes on, I'm going to respect the red light. Isn't government on exactly the wrong track by not considering the cost-benefit and weighing that as we lower cost of energy, we increase productivity, we create American jobs, and that fuels all of the ability to do the other things the American people want us to do? I'll take that back with me. Mr. Lankford.
Ms. Douglas, when there's a problem with a well, with any kind of operation, there's a spill. That does occasionally happen. This is not a perfect entity at all. Do you find it's typically that they have violated an existing regulation, or that there's some other new problem that has occurred when there's a problem at a well site?
It's typically an existing regulation that we have already got a solution for and got a regulation at the state level.
They're just slapped on the wrist, or they're fined, or they're punished, or reprimanded? What happens at that point?
All those things.
Okay.
All those things.
Okay.
It depends on the severity of the accident.
When something new occurs, hadn't thought about, hadn't seen, brand new on it, how do states share that, or do states share this? This occurred in our state, and so state to state, is there some process already in place to pass this on to other state regulators?
Absolutely. We pass on all the information we get to other state regulatory bodies. We have a national body called NARUC, that's the Regulatory Commission, where we can share information like that. We also have formulated specific groups to deal with specific problems, like the group called Stronger, which was really addressing oil and gas issues across state lines.
And how long does it take to get a new rule in place on that? You shared
At
around
a state level?
Right, at state
At a
level.
state level, we started rulemaking processes in December and had them wrapped up in March, and that was after we took all the input from stakeholders, and we had technical conferences as well.
Okay, it's a little longer than that in the federal government to go through the rulemaking
Yes, sir.
process. Okay, so it seems a little more agile.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Leonard, I want to bring up one of your charts that you have. For those of you that are in the booth, this is the 10-year flow back chart, the curve chart. We'll see if we can bring it up, because I want you to be able to explain that when it comes up, and we'll see if the magic of technology can bring it. There it is. I want you to explain this chart a little bit to me and talk a little bit, because you spoke about this in excellent technical language that probably 9 people totally got. And so I want to walk through this and try to help understand it, because this deals with air quality and EPA estimates of how they're trying to determine what the air quality is around sites. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so talk us through this chart.
Okay, this chart represents the relationship between time and gas volume for a typical well flowback completion. And when a natural gas well is hydraulically fractured, the first thing that comes out of the hole is water and sand. It must flow back out of the well so that gas may be produced. And at the initial start of flow, the stream is mostly comprised of this water and sand, with very little gas being able to fit in the pipe. But as more water and sand is recovered, that gas volume increases. Now, typically results show that after 3.5 days, the gas has recovered much water and sand and is producing enough gas to sustain itself. After this 3.5 days, the well is either turned to production or shut in. Now, and you can see that after that 3.5 day point, when the well is making enough gas to sustain itself, there is very little water and sand still left downhole, and the gas volume greatly increases. Now, industry data shows that we're only emitting the gas volume represented by the blue in that 3.5 days. But the EPA assumes that industry is creating emissions from flowback processes up to 10 days, and therefore it accounts for both the blue and the red gas volumes as emissions from our industry.
Okay, so here's my question. If you represent Devon, if Devon were to release all of that red area that you show there just into the air and not capture and sell it, would that be a wise thing to do or an unwise thing to do?
Very unwise.
Okay, I think they'd probably have somebody's job if they let that much gas just into the air on it. But you're saying EPA assumes for 10 days all gas that's coming out from flowback is not captured, is not sold, is just released into the air.
Correct.
Okay, and their data point for that was, their proof of that is what?
Their proof of that is a industry study, a voluntary industry study called the Natural Gas STAR program. And the Natural Gas STAR program captured emission reduction efforts from industry, and it captured numbers from green completions. Now, green completions are very different from typical completion processes, which is represented by the blue. Green completions, gas is captured. And so during a green completion process, everything in the red is captured, but the EPA assumes that that is all emitted.
Okay, so they're saying it's actually captured. EPA says, no, we think you actually let it go instead.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just a quick thing, because I see my yellow light is coming on as well.
Would the gentleman yield for a second?
Absolutely, I would to the chairman.
Now, I'm originally from Cleveland, so it gets cold there in the winter, kind of like here. Let me just try to put this in terms that hopefully I would understand. You're sort of saying that in the winter, when you start your car and you don't want to go, you go back in the house for a minute or two while it warms up, and then you drive down the street, it's like saying that your basic fuel economy on your car was 1 mile per gallon for that first street, rather than, because it included all the time you idled while it warmed up and going back in to get a coffee, and that first acceleration going down the street. And they're capturing that and saying over the life of that tank of gas, you're going to get 1 mile per gallon.
Yes, sir. That would be a correct statement.
So there's just literally, it's cooked books again, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Though in Oklahoma, we go start our cars early in the summer. Couple quick comments.
But the gentleman would yield one more time.
Absolutely.
I would note that I formerly created remote starters, so you push the button.
Yes.
And whether it was hot or cold, the car adjusted before you went out there. But that's a former life.
Secretary Ming, you mentioned we are 10 years away from energy independence if we don't mess this up. Do you have a couple areas that you look at and say these are the really critical areas, or is it just a whole series of things? But a statement to say we're a decade away from energy independence is a pretty strong statement.
it is a strong statement, but the reality is in the data. So, and I said that in regard to North America. So that's not just
that we can be North American. So Canada, United States, Mexico, take just energy. So we don't need OPEC oil, we don't need Venezuelan oil, we don't need North African oil. Just from North America, we can be energy independent in 10 years.
That's correct, and it's a combination. You have new energy supplies coming from the oil sands of Canada, extraordinary new oil supplies coming from North Dakota and the Bakken Shale. You have formerly marginal supplies of oil, essentially counties in western Oklahoma that were out of the money just as soon as 10 years ago. Everything's back in play now. So you take those three combinations of supply, and then you take the opportunities around energy efficiency, plus the opportunities of natural gas as a substitution fuel for transportation. All of those collectively combined, it is very possible that you could be energy independent in the next 10 years.
Mr. Leonard, I'm going to follow up with additional written questions about Wise County. That is a very serious issue, dealing with what has happened to Wise County, because that could affect us here in Oklahoma City, obviously,
Yes, sir.
in the days to come on that. And one quick statement from Mr. McDonald about not drilling on federal lands. My comment on that is, obviously, if other drillers like you, and I know that has occurred, that the process is now so bulky to drill on federal lands, that does a couple things. One, that reduces income to the taxpayer, because the taxpayer is not getting the royalty amount now. And then the western part of the United States, where the bulk of the land is BLM lands. In Oklahoma, we have very little federal lands on that, other than tribal lands and such. But you get into areas like Utah and Nevada and such, where up to 90% of the real estate in the state is controlled by the federal government. That's a tremendous hit to jobs in those areas if other drillers continue to do that.
That is true, and also the federal government has taken a lot of that land out of the ability to lease for oil and gas. So you've taken a huge resource that even if they were to permit it, in those certain areas that they've taken it, you can't even drill.
Well, it is my understanding we're headed to North Dakota. It'll be one of the questions that I have for some of the folks in North Dakota, because they have a mixture of BLM lands and private lands there, and to ask the timing between the two, how long it takes to get a permit on private, how long it takes to get a permit on federal lands there.
The Oklahoma Corporation Commission's got a special provision. If I pay a little more money, I can go down there and get a permit in one day if my permit is in proper order. From what I've been told by friends, 6, 9, 12 months a lot of times for a permit on the federal land.
Well, and the good news is they'll make you pay additional money anyway for the federal one too. So with that, I yield back.
The gentleman is correct. Mr. Farrell.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ming, you talked a little bit about natural gas and the abundance of natural gas and moving the transportation fleet over to natural gas. Is Oklahoma involved in doing anything to promote that or stimulate it, or working with the private sector to get that to happen more quickly?
Congressman, I'm really glad you asked that question. Yes, we are. Governor Fallon, along with Governor Hickenlooper from Colorado, have led an effort among governors. No offense to Washington, but we feel the states can push this effort forward to do a statewide procurement of natural gas vehicles, which would partner with manufacturers to entice them to build a functional and affordable natural gas vehicle at a price point where consumers can buy it. And as of today, 13 governors in a very bipartisan fashion have signed on to that, and we anticipate releasing a request for proposal to all the auto manufacturers here within a couple of weeks. It will actually be auto and truck, yes, sir.
It's my understanding that part of the problem with natural gas vehicles is getting the refueling infrastructure in place, where the gas stations that now sell gasoline would sell, have some sort of facilities to sell the natural gas for the vehicles. Now, it's also my understanding that in typical American entrepreneurial fashion, even the large auto manufacturers in Detroit are realizing that there's a potential market here. And there was a recent Wall Street Journal article that says they're doing combination vehicles that have an 8-gallon gasoline tank as well as a natural gas tank. So when you're in a location where you cannot refuel with natural gas, you're stuck. And that was done despite the government involvement with the automobile industry. It was done with a minimal amount of government help of choosing winners and losers. Ms. Horn, I want to go back. You were talking about a diversity of fuel sources as being a key to the success of the electric energy. And it's my understanding, in Oklahoma obviously has coal and wind, natural gas. I'm assuming there's some nuclear here as well. Is that?
As far as our company, we're natural gas, coal, and wind.
Okay.
Nuclear is over in Arkansas.
Okay. Now, y'all are, and I know in your wind farms, the Endangered Species Act is also, the prairie chickens are also an issue with your wind farm. The green folks seem to think that wind is the end-all, be-all, but can you tell me what the problem is with the prairie chickens and the wind farms?
It's an interesting question because we are asking that same question. What is it about wind farms that either affects or threatens the species? And right now, we have not heard anything about the structures themselves that they've documented that actually affect the species. So we're looking at what threatens the chickens and making sure that what we do is
I think it scares them. They think it's a bird of prey coming after them is what I've heard.